All right, so we are going to continue to read chapter 2. We left off with Aunt Petunia getting a telephone call saying that Mrs. Fig would not be able to watch Harry for the day. So we will see what happens next. Harry hated it at Mrs. Fig's. The whole house smelled like cabbage, and Mrs. Fig made him look at old photographs of all the cats she'd ever owned. "Now what?" said Aunt Petunia, looking furiously at Harry as though he had planned this. Harry knew he ought to feel sorry that Mrs. Fig had broken her leg, but it wasn't easy when he reminded himself it would be a whole year before he had to look at those Mr. Tibbles, Snowy, Mr. Paws, and Tufty again. "We could phone Marge," Vernon suggested. "Don't be silly, Vernon. She hates the boy." The Dursleys often spoke about Harry like this, as though he wasn't there, or rather, as though he was something very nasty that couldn't understand them like a slug. "What about, what's her name? Your friend, Yvonne?" "On holiday," snapped Aunt Petunia. "You could just leave me here," Harry put in hopefully. He'd be able to watch what he wanted on TV for a change, and maybe even have a go on Dudley's computer. Aunt Petunia looked as though she had swallowed a lemon. "And come back and find the house in ruins?" she snarled. "I won't blow up the house," said Harry, but they weren't listening. "I suppose we could take him to the zoo," said Aunt Petunia slowly, "and then leave him in the car." "The car's new. He's not sitting in there alone." Dudley began to cry loudly. In fact, he wasn't really crying. It had been years since he actually cried, but he knew that if he screwed up his face and wailed, his mother would give him anything that he wanted. "Dinky dum-dums, don't cry. Mummy won't let him spoil your special day," she cried, flinging her arms around him. "I don't want him to come!" Dudley yelled between the huge pretend sobs. "He always spoils everything." He shot Harry a nasty grin through the gap in his mother's arms. Just then the doorbell rang. "Oh, good Lord, they're here," said Aunt Petunia frantically. And a moment later, Dudley's best friend, Pierce Polkus, walked in with his mother. Pierce was a scrawny boy with a face like a rat. He was usually the one who held people's arms behind their backs while Dudley hit them. Dudley stopped pretending to cry at once. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Pierce and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him, but before they had left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he said, putting his large purple face right up close to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry, "honestly." But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was that, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys he didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald except for his fringe, which she had left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotaped glasses. The next morning, however, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia sheared it off. He had been given a week in the cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown back so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old jumper of Dudley's, brown with orange baubles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it became, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but it certainly wouldn't have fit Harry. Aunt Petunia decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry was not punished. On the other hand, he had gotten in terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchen. Dudley's gang had been chasing him as usual when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from Harry's headmistress telling them Harry had been climbing on the school building. But all he had tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door in his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed the wind must have caught him in mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Pierce to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, Mrs. Fig's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning it was motorbikes. Roaring around like maniacs, the young hoodlums, he said as the motorbike overtook them. I had a dream about a motorbike, said Harry, remembered suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a mustache. Motorbikes don't fly. Dudley and Pierce sniggered. No, they don't. It was only a dream. But he wished he hadn't said anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than asking questions, it was talking about anything acting in a way that it shouldn't. No matter if it was a dream or even a cartoon, they seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was very crowded with families. The Dursleys brought Dudley and Pierce large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the smiling lady in the van asked what Harry wanted before they could hurry him away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice lolly. It wasn't even bad, Harry thought, licking it as he watched the gorilla scratching its head and looking remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. I'll show you guys the pictures. Harry had had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Pierce, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker glory wasn't even big enough, Uncle Vernon brought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Pierce wanted to see huge poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. But at that moment, it didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was sleeping. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined at his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't bulge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped on the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "Ugh, this is boring," Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. All right. And we will stop there and continue right after this.